Welcome back to the second half of our fifth show, Change the Politics, Stop Fighting Each Other and Start Solving Our Real Problems. I'm really happy this evening to have as guests people here in Santa Cruz and from San Jose who are doing this kind of work. The first guest is Gayle Yamauchi. I got to know Gayle through Indivisible's local work group on finding common ground. And I loved working with her and was really pleased when she started taking the lead in producing living room conversations here in Santa Cruz. One of the coolest videos I really like on the show tonight was the one that talks about how living room conversations got going. So Gayle, thank you so much for being here today. And what would you like to tell us about them? I'm particularly curious right now as to why you're doing them.
Thanks, Nancy. Please forgive me, I prepared a few notes which will help me out. What I'd like to tell you about first is a little bit more about how living room conversations work. And then I'm going to tell you about what we've been doing since the beginning of this year in Santa Cruz Indivisible and what we're hoping and planning to do later this year. And then lastly, I'd like to tell you all about the National Week of Conversation that's coming up and how you can participate in that. So as the video clip from the first segment talked about, living room conversations began in 2010, and the primary goal was revitalizing civic discourse via conversation. They have created living room conversation as an open source project, and so what that means is that you don't need a fancy professional facilitator or any kind of certification to use the process. You can just try it, and you're free to adapt it to your heart's content. Recently, Living Room Conversations is starting to provide a brief training for people to get started if you're interested in that. The conversations can take place in people's living rooms, at coffee shops, online, or at larger events where there might be several smaller tables of the same conversation taking place. And I thought it might be helpful to just quickly tell you about the 6 conversation agreements, because I think this is why living room conversations really work. They are to be curious and open to learning, to show respect and suspend judgment, to find common ground and note differences, to be authentic and welcome that from others, to be purposeful and to the point, and to own and guide the conversation. So the premise is that there is agreement from the beginning that it's not a debate but a conversation, that we're sharing perspectives and experiences, and the attitude is, I want to hear what others think. So the opening rounds of questions of every conversation invite you to share what makes you tick and what experiences have led you to the beliefs that you hold today. And you might ask, why is this important? I believe that it is actually through conversation and deliberate human connection that we're going to reweave the fabric of our country. I think living room conversations is particularly important because it's accessible to those people who might identify with the sentiment, I don't care for politics, because it's a way that they can show their deep caring for the nature of society and a way for them to support it, one conversation that they have at a time. I believe that each connection and each conversation and each experience with others has an unseen ripple effect. You don't necessarily see it in that moment. So some of the topics, there's over 60 topics on the website, and some of them are more focused, such as gerrymandering and gun responsibility and healthcare, but some of them are more general, and you might find yourself talking about American values or the American dream with the people in your group. You can always adapt the questions, and if you want to create your own topic, they even have guidelines on the website about how to do that. So now I'm going to move into Santa Cruz Indivisible. As Nancy was mentioning, she and I work on a issues team in the Santa Cruz chapter of Indivisible called Finding Common Ground. And I also work with a smaller subgroup, an action team called Project Connect. And we all decided that we were very interested in bringing living room conversations to Santa Cruz. So with my friends Arlene, Mary Lou, and Nikki, we started doing that this year. So we're in what I consider our toddlerhood, We are getting ready next week to invite people across Santa Cruz Indivisible, which is, there's a little over 2,000 people on the mailing list right now, to sign up for our round 2 conversations. And for example, the topics that we've picked this time around based upon interest is money and politics, the future of work, to vote or not to vote, and united or divided. In the fall, what we plan to do is to start to work in local issues. And so one of the ideas that we're working with now is to have a living room conversation on the Greenway rail trail issue. Another one we've considered also is affordable housing. There's some work that's been done on that in the Bay Area, and we'd like to bring it to our area. And then I said I talked about the National Week of Conversation. So the tagline for it this year is "A Week for Mending America, One Conversation at a Time." And we can share, or you can go to the website for the National Week of Conversation.org. It's April 20th to the 28th. It's sponsored by the Bridge Alliance, and some of the members of the Bridge Alliance, besides Living Room Conversations, are the Village Square, the Centrist Project, Coffee Party, and then, as Nancy mentioned earlier, the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, and All Sides. So there's a lot of people who want to bring people together through conversation, and so this will be, I'm hoping, the first annual one we have.
I'm curious, I have a couple questions. What's your experience? How do you go about getting people into the conversations who really do differ from each other?
That's the challenge that we have in Santa Cruz. So far as we've been starting out, we've been focusing on giving people within Santa Cruz Indivisible the opportunity, and part of what you can do is you can pick topics where there might be a little bit more difference in opinion, even within, say, an all primarily center-left community. So, for example, in our community, talking about affordable housing and even the Greenway and rail trail issue are ways that
very
you can...
controversial.
Exactly. And there's actually some of the other, so some of the topics, to vote or not to vote, is another one that we're focusing on as the midterms are approaching. Often young people are asking, and not just young people. In the last election, there were people who didn't care for the 2 presidential candidate choices. So there's an interesting conversation that can be had around to vote or not to vote, and how do you make that decision?
I know that right now a big push in California and elsewhere for the upcoming elections is precisely to get people who have come to distrust the system so much for one reason or another. So I'm thinking that the conversations can themselves be a way of pulling people back into at least taking another chance on our system.
Exactly. They can be a way to sort of think out loud, right, about what you think and help you make a decision that way about what you want to do, how you want to approach it.
Do you have anything else, any responses to the first half of the show, or anything else you'd like to make sure that people watching the show get to hear on this?
I can't think of anything at this moment, but I may think of something a little bit later.
The one thing I'll say that has come up for me in connection with this work that I emphasize tonight is that we've had some, it really helps not just to do living room conversations, but more generally to train ourselves in how to listen, as Judy likes to call it, not just active listening, but I'm suddenly forgetting it. It was such a great statement. Anyhow, active, really listening to each other. That takes
generous listening.
Thank you. Generous listening. That takes practice. But the other thing, I'd focus so much on how we treat each other, but the question of what we talk about and whether other people have defined issues that are divisive, or whether we're actually coming together to try to figure out across our differences how we solve our problems. So I like the topics that you're dealing with here in Santa Cruz. They're not just about politics, they're about real decisions our community is facing right now. So thank you. I want to move to Lynda Marin, whom I have known now for a year or two, working on Citizens Climate Lobby. which is a fantastic national organization that is doing the most extraordinary work in bringing members of Congress together, using what is clearly a very clearly developed philosophy and practice of bipartisan lobbying. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about what Citizens Climate Lobby is trying to do, and then brag a bit about our victories and talk about kind of what is that philosophy about? How does it work?
Well, thank you, Nancy. And thank you for that great introduction, because you've really covered a lot of my first steps. But yes, we are nonpartisan. We're 10 years old now, and we began with the thought that we need climate solutions that bring us a livable world. And we settled on putting a fee on carbon with a revenue neutral dividend. And I think once that purpose was articulated, it helped the organization be very, very focused around one thing, which we feel is a very important solution. Not the only solution, but a very important one. So what we've done is created chapters that are entirely throughout the United States and internationally as well. And we make sure that we develop relationships with every single legislator in our Congress. And it's through those relationships really that we can have any kind of influence at all. We understand that. But the relationships themselves are very important. And sometimes they come and go. Legislators get voted in and out, but the relationships are always the key factor in what we're trying to do. I think that maybe a very important part is that we go in with the attitude that we are all in this together, because we are. And so we approach with respect and appreciation and gratitude. We always start our meetings genuinely appreciating something that legislator has done. And it doesn't really matter the party or the behaviors. We really are focused on making something work together. One of the best things that have come out of that, an important effect of that, has been that we have helped to create the Climate Solutions Caucus, which now has 72 members. It's completely
in Congress.
In Congress, it's completely bipartisan, and that it is out of that caucus that will come some kind of legislative proposal, and we have continuously, of course, worked with the members that are on that caucus to help refine and define how they will approach the solutions that they come up with, and we're hoping that an important one is carbon fee and dividend. So I think that another really important part that I would want to say about Citizens Climate Lobby is that we recognize that every person brings talents and capacities and passions to this work, and the important thing is to find out and put to use what each of those is in every single member of our organization. And something that I think very much enjoy in our chapter and all chapters is that people really can use their best talents to have breakthroughs in personal and political power, which is a part of our mission, actually. And I think that probably most members would say that they have pushed the envelope, their own envelopes, in terms of what they thought they were capable of doing. And of course, we do that in relationship to each other. Every chapter is very, very supportive of each other. So I think that there's a collective and personal kind of value here.
I've loved it's really one of the things I enjoy the most every month is our monthly meetings. We have 25, 30 people showing up, that really competent, really deep conversations, learning to write letters, learning to make lobby visits, and getting more and more comfortable with each other and talking about it. And the particular thing you're pursuing is appealing to both sides politically, because it is a market-driven solution. And I'm also thinking of an article that I'm going to put on the website, written from Texas. You can just they're winning in Texas and in the South. Just don't call it climate change. There's other language that gets you to the same place, and that's one of the most precious lessons as we're listening to each other, not only, especially where there's difference, listening not only for the content, but the framing. How do other people express their concerns? What moves them? How do they think about it? And it may get you to exactly the same place. And again, that's one of the great strengths, I think, that CCL is teaching all of us how to do with lobbying. And I'm taking the lessons learned there into other issues as well. Is there anything else that you'd want to comment about the show this evening, or that you'd like to make sure the audience hears?
Well, I'm just appreciating what Gayle said, because I see so much overlap between what you're trying to do with these living room conversations and what CCL is also trying to do. I think those exactly same strategies are, as you said earlier on, it's really just common sense, that we're
and respecting
each other. Yes, yes.
Thanks. Now I get to introduce my dear friend, Tim Bonneman, from Cologne. You're one of those still legal immigrants.
Yes.
And I had the pleasure about 10 years ago, I wangled an invitation to myself to be at an European Union meeting of ordinary citizens that had been randomly selected to spend a weekend together figuring out the questions they would want to talk with their fellow citizens about throughout all 27 countries. They got to define the questions for that weekend, and then they were going to be talking about them back in their countries with randomly selected groups for a whole year. And so I'm up on this in Brussels, watching folks doing this and listening to the 19 or 20 translators in their booths and watching all their gestures and just having a great old time. And I fall into a conversation with this cool guy from Cologne. And we talk and talk and talk, and I just liking him more and more, and I'm thinking, dang, I wish he didn't live in Cologne. Well, it turned out he didn't. He lived in San Jose. His family still live in Cologne. He's married to a Vietnamese woman. They have two great little boys who speak Vietnamese, German, and English perfectly. And he and I have been hanging out together every few weeks for 10 years now. And I'm not fooling, he turns out to be one of the international experts on bringing democracy online, using those tools to make what some people have called democracy 2.0. So you just completed a survey, an international survey on some of the tools, and you've got a database, a Participate DB, with hundreds of
Yes. So thank you
tools.
very much. Great to be here. My firm, we help organizations and communities use technology to support participatory processes. Over the last couple of decades, maybe, a rich ecosystem has sprung up of tools and processes that allow groups to cover the whole spectrum of, issue-based learning, ideation, problem
Ideation?
solving.
What do you mean by ideation?
Brainstorming as a group. To policy making, decision making, and in our work,
and playing nice together.
In ways that are productive, of course, right? And so what we do, we help our clients figure out how they can, spot the best opportunities in bringing in technology and where could that add value, and also then figure out what tools might be appropriate for them to use and how to deploy them. And on the side, we ran into a problem early on that there were just too many tools and technologies and services to keep track of, that we couldn't follow them all. So we created an open source, pretty much online catalog of tools that has grown to several hundred. And we just recently completed a global practitioner survey inviting people that do work, like you two and others, to share what technologies they have run into lately and make that available to others. And it continues to be a very fascinating space. There are very passionate people around the world who are interested in either fine-tuning the available technologies or coming up with completely new ideas to allow people to work their civic muscles and connect and drive towards solutions.
And to what extent do you look at things like participatory budgeting, for example, which is often done primarily in person, but you're looking at how to extend it into online venues as well?
Yes.
Or living room conversations?
Yeah, so in general, there are many, many processes that, of course, benefit from in-person connection. And nobody really wants to seriously get rid of that in-person connection. But oftentimes, doing something online or in a virtual space or via phone or whatever technology it is you end up with, while it may not be the full 100% fidelity of an in-person setting, can still be better than nothing. And it depends on what you're trying to do. But a lot of these processes, including participatory budgeting, have opportunities where you can extend what used to be just an in-person process into online venues. And that's where you can then involve more people or more of the right people or reach more of your inclusion or diversity targets, right? So with the use of technology and with the right implementation, you can, I believe, achieve stronger overall outcomes in your engagement with your particular public or community.
Another thing I really love about it is if you combine it with the availability of knowledge, knowledge that's laid out in really usable forms, simulations or sliders or choosing things, and people have time to reflect. They can come back, they can, there are some technologies that really allow people to be in conversation, learn from each other, shift their position, explore new possibilities, build on those possibilities over repetition, some of them in person, and track it as it goes, because it's all in some format that is recorded. And again, there's technologies designed to track conversations and the logic of them very well, or how systems are working. And you can go back and build upon that for the mutual understanding of what we're collectively up against and what we have working for us, and then to help frame the actual decision-making process. So is there anything else you want to add, Tim?
Well, I just always like to encourage people, organizers, activists who are trying to make their whatever issue better or work towards improvements to start to consider what options they have with technologies that could support their work or make it more impactful. It's a very fun space. Great people working in the space.
So we have a live audience and a few minutes left. If there's any questions or comments from you, I'd love to hear from you. We've got about 5 minutes for the show at this point. Yes, Ray.
In the first part of the program, one of the bipartisan items that was listed was, I think it's called the Oregon Citizens Initiative Review or something like that. And I've been inspired about that project ever since I heard about it. Would you be willing to go ahead and describe it a little bit more right now?
Sure. I mentioned it in connection with examples of what I'm calling do-it-ourselves democracy that has been made official in Oregon. They bring in randomly selected randomly selected citizens to sit together and reflect with each other and bring in like a jury, experts, and get whatever information they need to look at each of the items on their ballot, each of the initiatives and referenda, talk it through, and either reach a consensus as to what they would recommend to fellow citizens that they vote on that topic, or reach at least a well-informed, carefully thought out, respectful, here's why we would take this side, here's why we would take the other side. So they can agree to disagree. But it's from a citizen's perspective, and all the special interests get pulled out of it. And citizens can see each other being in charge of the process.
And if I recall correctly, that information is then put on the ballot. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. Absolutely. The whole arguments, both, thank you. I left out the most important thing. It actually, when they send out the ballot pamphlet with the pro and con arguments, the citizens' analysis is always included.
So it's not just the opponents and the proponents that we get to hear from.
Precisely.
We get to hear from the citizens own more objective
Exactly.
assessment.
Exactly. Yes, Jim.
Tim, could you give a practical example a practical example of a use of tools for a particular event or campaign?
Yeah, so a project we did in Australia a while ago was they actually had a jury process where the carefully or randomly selected jury members were meeting, I think, 3 or 4 times over the course of several months. And then we provided infrastructure for them to connect in between those in-person meetings to continue the conversations online so they could have more productive meetings if and when they were, meet again in person. So that's a good use of where the online technology can just supplement the core process, right? And in terms of policy making, there are just too many examples to list where online venues get set up, people come together, they learn about the issue, they exchange views, and in some structured format inform the decision makers.
I'm thinking also of in the Citizens Climate Lobby, Climate Interactive, which has developed this great tool where people, it ended up being used not just by students, but actual policymakers around the world. You can plug in different policies and find out what the outcome is on carbon. And they do role-playing games around it. And again, you can create things like that occur online, and people can get prepared for a conversation in advance. And then the relationships that get built can be followed up with later. All of those are extensions going into and out of. And I think we're running out of time. So may I thank each of you. Tim Bonneman from Intellytics, Lynda Marin from Citizens Climate Lobby, and Gayle Yamauchi from Indivisibles, Finding Common Ground and Living Room Conversations. I'm Nancy Glock-Grueneich, and you will find on our website, not quite yet, but as of this Thursday, which is April the 12th, more information, resources where you can follow up. I'll have resources from all the things we talked about this evening, as well as our guests, and where you can follow up with action or if you'd like to help make these things happen. Thank you.